Come around and applause for the breakfast.
Thank you. We appreciate you guys meeting together and the land use issues that you guys are tackling and working. So we wanted to bring some breakfast for you and let you know that we appreciate your hard work on behalf of Utah's residents and the general public. So I'm Scott Phillips. I'm with the Salt Lake Off-Road and Outdoor Expo. Our nonprofit is the Utah Off-Roaders Alliance, and that's who we're actually here representing today. We'll be over just below the rotunda. We have our Off-Roaders Day on the Hill, where we have several clubs and businesses there to try to let the legislature know how important off-roading is to the state, to the economic impact that it brings. We've been able to do research on that economic impact, and we had some really startling numbers and things like that we share out there. And if you've got a few minutes, we'd love to have you come by and talk with us and give you a little bit of talking points of some of the research that we've been able to find. I don't want to take up time in your meeting, but thank you for having us here. Appreciate it.
Glad to have to take up a little bit of time on the meeting, but recreation is an $8.5 billion industry in Utah.
It is, and I apologize, I don't have the talking points here. The recent data that we were able to parse out from a multitude of reports, because it's not easy to find, they kind of buried it, was from 2017. And then as soon as we released our numbers, there was a crucial report that got changed that keeps us from being able to compile those same numbers again and have a year-over-year impact of what off-road and motorized recreation brings to the state. So we're a little frustrated with that. We're working to commission a study on that, and I think the Utah Public Lands Alliance is a step ahead of us doing the same thing. So we might partner with them to do that.
Do you have an idea what the percentage of that 8 billion some odd comes from off-road, ATV, like type of stuff?
Well, it's
a lot.
Yeah, it is. It's huge. The numbers that we found showed that the economic impact was higher than like the ski industry and the ski tourism.
From SEMA, for Utah, the total economic output of off-road is 3.43 billion and 14,496 jobs.
Thank you.
Better. Wages and benefit is 1.03 billion. And total taxes paid is 411 million.
Yeah, I didn't know I'd be standing up here saying I didn't know I'd be talking, so I apologize for being unprepared.
Hey, you brought the burritos. I mean,
there we go. Again, we truly appreciate all of you and your efforts on behalf of public lands and having our ability to access them. My grandfather was a shepherd down in Loa for years and years, and we love that area. And unfortunately, my wife's had some health issues, and she can't hike and get out. The only way that she can access the places that I grew up loving is in a vehicle. So, just thank you.
And Zach, it's good to have you here. Zach runs Pallet. I don't even know your last name other than Pallet. Smoot, yeah, Zach. I should know that. So thanks for coming. Everybody, welcome. Sheila Colleen is a friend of mine. She came here and with Rhea and Chad Booth. So thanks for coming. And Jody's here. Thank you, Jody. She makes this happen. I think you guys know my intern. Looks like he's probably out helping people get in. Tyden is his name. So just listening to Scott tell that and get a little bit emotional. I've got a little story that I'll tell just really quickly. When I drive out of Blanding coming up by Moab, there's a canyon there called Big Indian Canyon, and up there is a mine, most productive mine, uranium mine, probably in the history of the world. And the name of the mine is Mi Vida, and it was Charlie Steen's. And I talked to his son Mark, and because I had this little image in my mind that this was a very, poor individual. He was out prospecting, boom and bust. And, and I asked him about that mine. He said, yeah, my dad named that. And he showed me a picture, had four boys. Two of them could have shoes. The other two had to wait till they grew into their big brother's shoes. They lived in a $15 a month dirt hut basically while he was exploring that. And I said when he named that, Mi Vida is my life. It was not my fortune. It was not. It's like that's my life. And you see that with people when we're talking about people's livelihoods. It's not trivial. It's not a small thing. When they start closing roads, it affects people's jobs, affects their communities. People that have been there for generations are very, very invested in our public lands, and that's what Yellowcake Caucus really is about: public lands and access. And like Scott, I appreciate all you as well. Reg from Plipco, that Utah we stand out for the um, investment that we've made in protecting our public lands. And with that, another great advocate that we've got in public lands is the Blue Ribbon Coalition. There was a time when Blue Ribbon Coalition was kind of AWOL. We didn't know quite what they were doing, and it seemed like they were, left a vacancy. Hey, we need some legal advocacy. We need some information, and it just wasn't there. But a few years ago, Spencer Gilbert kind of jumped into that, and I don't know if most of you probably don't know Spencer, but he kind of got into that, recruited Ben. Ben can tell the story about that, but it's a game changer. When we just last week on the 18th, the SEC pulled their natural asset company application, which was basically designed to sell the United States to China, truly, and they pulled that application. There was thousands of responses that came from Blue Ribbon Coalition on that, and it makes a big difference. And out of those thousands of responses, a lot of those were going to other legislators and things who may have been uninformed. So thank you, Ben. Simone is here. Simone Griffin and Griffin. Thank you. I knew I was going to get that. Griffin. Yes, Simone Shumway to me. She's from my hometown, and her grandpa was Calvin Black, who was a great commissioner, and I yeah, kind of I patterned my commission life after Calvin. I read his life history. There was a thing there once that called him the firebrand from San Juan County, and I thought, okay, if you're going to get anything done in these small counties, you've got to make some noise. Now those rural commissioners know that they've got to speak up if they want to be heard, if they want to compete with the Wasatch Front. Anyway, I'm talking too long. I'm going to turn time over to Ben and Simone, and let's give them a hand. Feel free to go back and grab a breather, or you can wait till the end. That's fine too.
All right, well, me and Simone will tag team. She made a PowerPoint because I was joking around that if I ever rule the world, I'm going to run on a platform of eliminating PowerPoint from government. And I'll cut government by 30% overnight. Especially like the Department of Defense and the education budgets. And then I'll go after acronyms so that we can actually understand. But we decided we'd still show PowerPoints. There's some maps and things we wanted to show you. But as Phil said, we are the Blue Ribbon Coalition. And my first interaction with the Blue Ribbon Coalition, I was working with Mike Lee's office out in Washington, D.C. And it was an election year. And during an election year, everybody leaves Washington to come back to run for their offices. And there was a notice came through the Federal Register. This was the first time I started reading the Federal Register. How many of you in here read the Federal Register? Okay. That's the first time I've ever seen anybody raise their hand. This is a good group. And there was a proposal in there to list the coral pink sand dunes tiger beetle as an endangered species. They wanted to close more of the coral pink sand dunes than they had already closed. And so I took that on as just like a little project. I'm like, well, there's nothing to do here in Washington right now. Everybody's gone. And I am now the second most knowledgeable person about coral pink sand dune tiger beetles in the world because I read all 8 studies about them. So the only guy that knows more is the guy that wrote the studies. He's some scientist out in North Carolina. And I worked on that. I kind of read through everything they were saying. And basically what they said was ATVs are killing the tiger beetles. They know because they would go and find them and tie ribbons around them somehow, and then watch them run away on the sand, and then go run over them with the ATVs to see if it would kill them. And they found out that after multiple attempts, you could kill a tiger beetle by running over it with an ATV. And so they assumed, therefore, that the ATVs were killing the tiger beetles. Then we found one of the other studies, they said that the tiger beetles actually reproduce better when the soil's been disturbed. And so that they were actually trying to save another species of these in California, where they were actually building trails where the tiger beetle habitat was, so they'd have better habitat for reproducing. And so we brought that study up to the Fish and Wildlife Service. Does look, they actually like people disturbing the soil. And I gave that study to like Victor Iverson at the time, who kind of spread it around the state government. And then I called Blue Ribbon Coalition and I said, hey, if you guys want to help us with this, and they did an awesome job. They contacted all of the agencies, a lot of folks in the government, a lot of the other nonprofits. And at that point, they withdrew the rule. They didn't actually list the tiger beetle. And so the sand dunes are still open now if you go there. And so it was the first time I kind of successfully fought to keep something open here in Utah. And Blue Ribbon Coalition was a big part of it. By the time we got to the Bears Ears fight, I was like, I'm gonna call up my friends at Blue Ribbon Coalition. And I was like, where are they? And either with regardless of that, I mean, we're still fighting over Bears Ears today. And I came to work here. I think we've done a good job of getting it back in the game, and we're currently part of a lawsuit with the state challenging the national monument expansion. So we're still fighting over Bears Ears. And so Phil invited us to come today. I was here last year talking about Lake Powell and brought Zach with me, and we'd started an initiative called Fill Lake Powell. And I'm happy to report that it worked. It's a lot more full this year than it was last year. A lot of that had to do with the snow and not us, but we are participating in a lot of those plans that the Bureau of Reclamation is developing to determine how we're going to manage our water out here in the West, and especially in periods of time when there's less of it. And so we have a good group of folks that are helping us with that. But as Phil said, I mean, when he asked me to speak about this, he wanted us to talk about these natural asset companies. And I first learned what a natural asset company was from Phil, like in 2021. I know because I wrote a little article about it, because it kind of blew my mind. I'm like, here's these companies, they're looking at all of this undeveloped natural land, basically nature, and they don't have just like dollar signs in their eyes. They have like dollar signs that are so big, like they're bigger than our whole global economy. They see this like the natural asset company economy as worth $4 quadrillion. Like, that means this land's worth a lot. And so I'm like, how do I get like our friends at Sitla to put those same dollar sign glasses on and see that this land is this valuable? But I still didn't like the idea. I don't want natural asset companies to be a thing, but that was my first thought experiment. That was pretty cool. Yeah, but we never did, because they aren't a real thing. We actually don't believe in this global domination of our natural resources, what this really kind of feels like. And so in my article, I said, I don't think these are a good thing for humanity, but it is an interesting way to look at vacant land to say, how should we value this? And so we were talking about this years ago, and I'm like, well, this still seems kind of fringy. There might be. I remember in Washington, I went to some meeting like this, and I actually went and spoke to one of the executive directors of an environmental organization, one of the big national ones, and he brought up ecosystem services as if it was like going to be this next big thing that they were going to be working on. I'm like, okay, I'll have to make a mental note of that. And so then I kind of got consumed with all these other fights, like the Lake Powell thing. We'll talk a little bit about what's going on in Moab today. But then the Federal Register, again, I don't read it all the time now. I hired someone to help me with that. But there was a rule that came through, and it was with the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is not an agency we deal a whole lot with at Blue Ribbon Coalition. We're usually working with the BLM and the Forest Service and our friends in the state, and National Park Service, Bureau of Reclamation now. And so we work with a lot of the federal agencies. And so I was like, well, let's go see what their rule is. Let's see what their process is for this rule. And it was a rule that they were introducing with the New York Stock Exchange to create a new company called a natural asset company. They were going to develop all new accounting standards for this company and listed on the New York Stock Exchange as a publicly traded company. And the purpose would be to go and buy up natural assets that would just be held. They wouldn't be, they'd be looking for unproductive lands, like lands that haven't been developed, and they would just own those. And then they would be owning what they call the ecosystem services on that land. So if nature is happening on that land, so if there's a watershed, if there's an air shed, so plants transpiring and like putting carbon dioxide and oxygen in and out of the air, like all these things happening on that land, those are valuable services that we haven't yet figured out how to privatize and monetize in our economy. And so these natural asset companies will be the vehicle that we will do that. And so we looked at that rule and said, wow, this is actually kind of serious. They're really going to do this. It would be good to educate people about this. So we looked at the rule, looked at their comment deadline, thinking it would be like the BLM and think, oh, we'll have 30 days. Let's digest this a little. And then it was like, nope, they had like 12 days or 14 on their comment, and the deadline was that day. I was like, well, we'll just write our own comment about this, get it in, and then see where it goes. And then because enough elected folks got involved, they ended up extending those deadlines and extending the deadlines, and we did have a chance to educate the public about this. And so here are some of the things we told them. If you read the proposal, if you read the Intrinsic Exchange Group has a whole 20-page document of their vision of what a natural asset company is. And they say, well, this will buy sovereign lands, which is public lands, lands owned by governments. We believe these would own national parks, and they want to also buy private land and probably control them through things like conservation easements. And we're like, good grief. I didn't think they'd like throw the national parks in there, but they did. And it's not that they would actually like own title to the land in the national parks, but they would just own the ecosystem services, the nature in the national parks. And then they'd be finding out a way to get a return on investment on that. So I'm like, well, how are they going to get a return on investment just by owning land? Whose money are they going to take out of whose pockets to do this? Because they're seeing $4 quadrillion. That's got to come from somewhere. And they're still not very clear about that, but they say we'll model this after the carbon exchange markets. And that's worth $4-5 trillion. And we think what we're doing here will be way bigger than that. And so that means they're going to look at things like carbon, where they're like, well, people are polluting. If you want to pollute, you can pay for that. And then that money will go into something that probably then goes to natural asset companies. And they're thinking way bigger than carbon. So that means any impact to water. So the answer to like, who's going to pay for it? It's like, we all. It'll be costs baked into everything we consume and everything we do. They will be baking in environmental impact costs in 1,000 different ways so that these massive companies can get an ROI. And then they'll be using that money from their ROI to be locking up more of our land. Their proposal did assume that they would have management authority over the land that they have held within a natural asset company. And so our management partners in these agencies would now have these new privately held companies that are having a pretty big seat at their table, if not the seat at the table. And so these are a lot of the problems we pointed out. I mean, we put this out on social media. We sent it out to our big base of members. We started talking to other elected officials, other nonprofits that cared about this. And we did get, like Zach, one of our videos got like 1 million views. And we know like during that time when that video was going viral, we had thousands of comments in the SEC. You know, when they bury something on like page 68,000 of the Federal Register, they're hoping they don't get any public scrutiny. That's like the whole reason page 68,000 of the Federal Register exists. And so when Phil told us to talk, we thought this would still be in play. They were going to reach a decision by the 17th of January, whether they were going to approve the rule, disapprove the rule, or continue to have more process about it. And on, I think the 17th it was, or last week, we just got notice that they withdrew it. And so that's natural asset companies. That's what we were like invited here to talk to you about today. And the good news is I think we kind of had a big victory. And a lot of folks here were a part of that. I know Treasurer Oaks isn't here. He was a pretty strong voice on this issue. We don't think it'll go away though. I think it was January 18th, but and so this was like the first thing we wanted to talk about, but for now, we're kind of, this is withdrawn. It'll probably emerge its head in some new form, some new thing. I don't believe that $4 quadrillion, and the whole economy of the world is like 500 trillion. And so I don't know where all this other money is, but it's still there on the sidelines figuring out how to want to do this. because at the end of the day, this was just one tool that's part of an even bigger agenda of what these people want. They know they want to bring money in to do this. And so when President Biden got in, the first thing he did was issue Executive Order 14008. I'm going to let Simone talk a little bit about this, so it's not just me. Why don't you tell us about this?
Yeah, which is, I mean, I'm sure everybody here has heard of 30 by 30 to protect, conserve 30% of the nation's land and water by 2030. And so there's no laws that have been passed for this. It's just an initiative that President Biden and these environmental groups are trying to achieve. And there's not a lot of real specifications. So how those lands are going to be protected, it's unsure. Because I mean, if you look at our federal lands in the nation, I mean, we kind of already have 30% protected. But they're claiming that there's only like 12% protected. So they're going after hundreds of millions more acres of land, of waters through wild and scenic river designations, through wilderness designations, national monument designations, because they think what we have currently is not enough. So we see this huge push right now, and there's lots of different methods that they are and avenues that they're seeking to achieve 30 by 30. So like I said, wilderness designations, national monuments, wild and scenic river designations, those are kind of the main obvious ones, but there's a lot more that we're seeing, whether it's through listing endangered species. Once they can list a species, then they can use that as a reason in resource management plans, travel management plans on the BLM Forest Service, to close roads, to close access. That's one pathway that they're doing. There's also national conservation areas. In fact, one of the biggest land grabs that I've seen since being with Blue Ribbon it's called the Missouri Headwaters Conservation Area. And this is in Montana, and they're proposing to designate 5.8 million acres as a national conservation area. There's never been one this size designated. It hasn't been approved yet, but that's what they're trying to do. And the reason why they're trying to protect this with the national conservation areas, they say, is because they want to purchase about 400,000 acres of private land for conservation easements. They can't do that unless it's designated as a national conservation area to get the funding to then be able to purchase it. And so that national conservation area is very worrisome. There's lots of other bills right now. We've got the Protecting America's Wilderness Act that's going to designate millions of acres as wilderness. There's the Rogue Wilderness Act that's going to designate over 1 million acres of wilderness. The Owyhees in Idaho, there's a bill for that. There's lots of national monument proposals. There's 3 in California. There's one to expand a national monument in California. We've got Colorado national monument proposals. I mean, this is millions and millions of acres through national monuments, through wilderness bills that are still trying to get through the legislature. And so lots of different pathways that they are using to preserve or protect even more acres than what they already have. The Red Rock Wilderness Act.
Do you have a map of
Oh,
that?
yeah.
Let's-
Okay. So
Yeah, so
yeah,
let's talk a little bit of
Red Rock Wilderness Act, SULA.
Utah.
I mean, we've already got so many designations, but with Grand Staircase Escalante, we've got Bears Ears, but that's not enough to have it even be a national monument. They want it to be wilderness. They want no roads, no access. And it goes throughout, it's not just Southern Utah, because lots of times SUA will label it as, oh, it's just Southern Utah, let's protect all these places that we hike and whatever. But there's lots of areas too that are very important for the extraction industry, for other resources rather than just recreation. So, I mean, that's a big chunk of where.
So I want to talk a little bit about this. So this is SUA's plan for the state of Utah. It's 8 million acres. They want it all locked up in the most restrictive designations they can possibly get. And it affects just about every county except for the Wasatch Front, which is where they're headquartered. And um, and they've introduced this in Congress and they get co-sponsors. How many co-sponsors do they have from the state of Utah for this bill? Zero. How many have they ever had? Zero. So who do they get to introduce it? They get Dick Durbin, a senator from Illinois, the great expert on our natural resources out here in Utah, to introduce this. And yesterday or this week, this last few days, they published a little meme on social media celebrating all their co-sponsors on this bill. It's like members of the House of Representatives from like New Jersey and Delaware, and where all these places that are basically nowhere close to Utah, or with people who have no idea what's going on, but they just see a picture of pretty rocks and think, yes, we want to protect that. And so you look at their prospects in Congress, and they're not great. To get this passed anytime in the near future, but they've been incredibly successful at getting it passed. There are a lot of things in play that they're doing to make sure this becomes the land management policy for our state. And whether they get the bill passed in Congress or not, it won't matter. By the time they pass it, it'll be done. And so the ways that they're doing it is, first of all, Antiquities Act, National Monument designations. And so that's all of this, all of this. They threatened that here. So there's a lot going on in the Emery County bill. So they use that Antiquities Act abuse as a tool to make sure they're getting this done. And we're looking, I mean, we've all been participating in those monument management plans. We saw what they wanted to do with the grand staircase. And it was the most restricted versions of that are absolutely terrible. It's basically designating all 2 million acres of that as wilderness. And they leave like 8 roads open in 2 million acres in their resource management plan. And so that's the state of Delaware having 8 roads. Would that be a functional state? Would that be, it doesn't make any sense. If you're people like us who want to access and utilize and live in our state. But if you're from Delaware, I'm sure it sounds nice to lock up all of Utah. The next thing they're doing are we're involved in a settlement with the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, the Department of Interior, and the state of Utah has been part of this. And these are the travel management plans. And so the Wilderness Act, so all of this area, everything orange that they want to propose as wilderness, the legal definition of the Wilderness Act doesn't let them do that if there are 5,000 contiguous acres in that area with a road. The legal definition of wilderness is 5,000 contiguous acres without a road. And so one way to get rid of all the roads is you pass your Wilderness Act, and now all of a sudden those roads have to be closed, or if you're very good at negotiating in Congress, you can cherry stem a handful of them in. But if you're what you can do is just wander all the roads out of the system before this even gets passed, which is what they're doing now through these travel management plans, which affect. And so we've been heavily involved in those. There's 13 of them in that area. And so that is the Book Cliffs. It's basically everything in Emery County. It's this stuff up here, Dinosaur North and Vernal. We had 3 areas in Moab, which was Labyrinth Rim, Gemini Bridges over here, down here, Canyonlands or Canyon Rims. We're going to do Dolores River here. We've done the San Rafael Desert. It's going to be all of this, the Henry Mountains. We're doing the 2 areas in King County that aren't national monuments. Those will be done, we think, in the next 30 to 90 days, according to the court. And so we're planning roads and just about everything orange over here right now through these travel plans. And during the Trump administration, we did this plan, and in that one, during the Trump administration, they looked at that. They said there's 1,100 miles of roads out there. We're going to open 800, which was good. I mean, SUA could suit them because they thought having 300 open in that area was too much. And so once the Trump administration released that plan, SUA sued them again. And they had to go and reanalyze a bunch of roads there. And they ended up they had to reanalyze 190 miles of roads and trails in that area. They ended up closing 120 more. And if you want to know what they actually closed, it was the stuff along the river, because they want that river corridor to be completely inaccessible unless you're in a boat. And if it was in this orange area, that was given the high priority. So they basically used the legal settlement to enact the Red Rock Wilderness Act here in this area. And so they're using this legal settlement process to create their bill on the ground. And so a few months ago in August, we got the decision for the Labyrinth Rim Gemini Bridges area in Moab. And this time we got a very different decision than what we'd seen come out of the Trump administration with the San Rafael Desert. They basically adopted SUA's plan for that area in Moab and closed 317 miles of some of the most popular off-road trails, not just in the state, but in the world. And you see here, it's all this orange where they're closing stuff. And so the Utah, the Moab Travel Management Plan, that travel plan was basically an enactment of the Red Rock Wilderness Bill. And one more little note here. Well, I was on a meeting about the book push plan with Lance Porter and his team up in the Vernal field office. And we were talking about some roads. It was during COVID and we were on a Zoom, we were looking at the maps and I was like, well, why are you guys like concentrating all the closures in this area? And he's like, oh, that area is in the Red Rock Wilderness Bill. I was like, did that get passed? Did Congress pass that? I missed that. And he's like, oh, well, no. I'm like, well, why are you managing your land towards a bill that hasn't been passed yet? What is the purpose of that? And the stipulation in the legal settlement does say they have to produce an alternative that basically meets these guidelines. I mean, they used a judge to create this law through the form of a legal, and that's essentially what they're doing. And they're not even super careful or shy about it. And so that's one way they're enacting this 30 by 30. And this is how it's happening in Utah. We can assure you the same process is happening in other states. We've had 4 plans, travel plans, go through this process in like the last 6 months in Idaho, in the Owyhee area. That's on the hit list. Arizona's been very aggressive with their travel plans. They all get their funding and budgets and things depending on how they get things like this done. And so we're happy to say, I mean, we are challenging that Moab plan in federal court. The state of Utah has been always there with us challenging these plans. I think everyone there knows what's going on. But we wanted you guys to see that, so you can see that this isn't, take away the NAC proposal, we still have really big problems on our hands with this effort to lock up our natural resources. So let's keep going, Simone. Okay, the VLM conservation rule. So let's talk about this. Another big problem. Who's already heard about this landscape health and conservation rule? So for those who haven't heard of it, Simone, why don't you explain a little bit?
Well, the BLM is wanting to amend FLTMA to make conservation a use. So the BLM has to, when they're doing their land management plans or process, they have to consider all these uses, you know, such as access, mining, grazing, and all of those different users and interests. And they want their conservation should be considered a use. So they could take some land and say, well, you know, this used to be used for grazing, but now we're going to remove that and it's going to be conservation.
Or they'll put a new layer on top of it.
So they're trying to make conservation as a use. They're also really trying to prioritize areas of critical environmental concern. ACECs, these are another tool that the agencies use to restrict access. They'll claim, oh, ACECs can still allow roads and access, but historically we've seen the fact that it's an ACEC be used as an excuse to close roads in an area or not allow access because it's designated as an ACEC. So that's the other issue. And then, but the biggest concern probably is that it's going to allow conservation leases. So you have a grazing lease, oh, you could also get a conservation lease now. They're not very well defined in the Federal Register. They said up to 10 years, but a different type of conservation lease could even be more than 10 years. So it would allow anybody, it's not very specific, to come and purchase a conservation lease and control that area of land for conservation. So
leases. So on the grazing leases are 10 years. So the rule says that current leases, right? But our concern is what happens after the grazing lease is up in 10 years and you have two leases. They can pick then which one they're going to go with. So that's how we view, even though they're saying that it's not going to impact valid existing rights now, you can see the writing on the wall down the line. They're going to be removing everything but the conservation leases because your conservation leases will hold.
And so it's an enormous threat, and let's start again with the legitimacy of the process on this. So FLIPMA, I mean, if you're in a rural state here in Utah, you kind of know what FLIPMA is, but it's the operating system for our public land system. It's the thing that says we are going to have a multiple use public land system. And it says we are going to have grazing and mining and conservation. And we're not opposed to conservation. I think all of us love the beauty of our state and want to preserve it. But then it doesn't get into the details. If you want to get into the details of how the grazing program works, there's other statutes that codify that. There's the Taylor Grazing Act. There's dozens of mining acts. And the BLM's come out saying we don't have any tools to prioritize conservation on public land. And I'm like, well, you have like more tools for conservation than everything together. They have the Invasive Species Act, they have NEPA, they have the Clean Water Act, they have the Clean Air Act, they have the Resource Protection Act, they have the Antiquities Act. Like you can just they list these in the front of every plan, and it takes like 2 pages to list them all. And so they don't need like another tool. They can and do all the time prioritize conservation on public land. And they have 400 law firms that call themselves environmental nonprofits that sue them to make sure they prioritize conservation. And so if you read FLIPMA, there is not ever mentioned in that law the word conservation lease. It never talks about this. So they have like conjured this out of thin air, and there's no statutory basis for it. The closest you can find of any sort of historical precedent for this idea is the college paper for the director of the BLM right now. There's nothing in law justifying this. But the allowing a conservation lease is a transactional thing. It will bring money into the federal government, which last time I checked, it's Congress that has the power of the purse and the authority to raise money for the federal government, not Tracy Stone Manning, an unelected bureaucrat. They do not have that power under the Constitution. So this is unconstitutional. There's no statutory basis for it. I got called by a reporter at the Salt Lake Tribune a week ago to be interviewed about this because she said we hear they're going to release this by the end of the month, the final version of this. So this will probably be the next Blue Ribbon Coalition lawsuit. We'll be looking for partners to join us on this one, and I suspect the state's getting prepared for that. We know everybody sees all the problems with this and they'll challenge it, but the administration, you're not paying attention to this administration, and they are ramming through their agenda where it suits their needs, and this will be one that they push. Yeah.
They're giving fish even a higher priority than humans. I mean,
They shut down
like
the
a
whole
lot of
California.
fish in the aquatic system.
And for us, we looked at this too, and this came out in the summer, and we saw conservation lease. This is a way to create a path for people with money to come in and influence how this gets managed. Then we saw the NAC rule get produced, after that, and so we're like, well, this is basically just clearing the way to sell all of our public lands to the NACs. That's how we're going to do it. And you read the news stories when what rule got withdrawn, and the people was like, we didn't know anything about the BLM rule. We had no idea. I'm like, you probably didn't. Maybe you were getting used as like an ignorant tool in this whole process. But don't tell us that these things aren't connected. Like, it's pretty obvious once you start actually looking at the dots and saying, do those things connect? They absolutely do. Whether it was intentional or not, they can fight over that. But and Phil, to your point about the water, that is true. That's why we also got heavily involved in the Lake Powell issue, the Colorado River. We're seeing them removing dams right now up on the Klamath River Basin. There are big proposals to remove a lot of the Snake River dams. And there was, and that worries us because there's been a movement to remove the Glen Canyon Dam since the day they first poured a single drop of concrete there.
Conspiracy theories, the dams being removed in our nation right now. They're undergoing multiple dams.
And there are serious proposals to basically drain Lake Powell and get rid of that lake and bypass the dam, if not remove it. And so if we in this state and we like Lake Powell, we think we wasn't built on accident. It was pretty intentional. We built it for a reason to have cities and civilization out in these western deserts. And the water fluctuates in the lakes. They were designed with that in mind, and so that they could be reserves when we need them. And we needed those reserves these last few years, and we used them. And now they're replenishing. And it's hard to predict when they set the plans in place for how we were going to manage the river. It didn't quite pan out how everyone predicted back in 1926, but it was still pretty good. I mean, we're in the ballpark, and we need to adjust our management, and that's why we need everybody adding their voice to this process. And one thing I didn't think they thought would happen would be how big this recreation economy would get. During the year of low water levels at Lake Powell, the National Park Service releases their economic impacts of each park every year. And during the 2 low water years in 22 and 21, they lost over $200 million in economic activity in the surrounding communities around Lake Powell. And the power generation, which they really moved they did a lot of things to put water in that lake so they could keep generating power. That was a huge priority. That's part of the reason it's there. That's about 150 million in economic activity is the power. So recreation is bigger than the power, but they act like it's an afterthought. And we need to get away from that. Our state has made a conscious effort to make outdoor recreation part of the fabric of our economy and something that sustains our rural communities. We cannot treat it like an afterthought, and we have to be all inclusive about prioritizing every form of recreation that's happening out there, or we're going to do a huge disservice. Very difficult to make a business work in Page or Kanab if Lake Powell's not there, if you've built a massive business around that. And there are several big businesses that have been built around that recreation economy on the lake. And they support I know several of you here are from those counties, and Arizona has a stake in this as well, and the other states in the basin. And so we decided to be the recreation voice on that. We've been very good at advocating for that. They do take us as a serious stakeholder, and we recognize that water is important and power is important. We're not the only thing, but we should be part of the discussion. And so let's keep going. So we have a few minutes to do. Yeah, so here we have American Service for Liberty is a group we've worked with on some of this stuff. They're a good group that kind of helps sound the alarm. They're based in Texas, and they focus a lot on private property rights. They don't have the recreation focus that we do, but they have been involved in some of the public land issues. And we were on a meeting with them yesterday, and they're talking about the Inflation Reduction Act had $20 billion of money for conservation easements. And I'm a free market guy, and so I'm not categorically opposed to the idea of a conservation easement if people want to use their private property. I actually manage I have 3 acres in New Harmony, and I manage 2 acres of it as wilderness because I don't have time to do anything else. But not because the government told me to. It's just because anyway, it's just weeds. But it's great. There's bugs. There's all kinds of nature that happens out on my land. But there is the conservation easement is the tool for how you get private property into government hands. And so that's a dangerous proposition in a country where the government already owns so much land, and especially in a state like Utah, where it's the federal government that owns so much land. And so we have to be very careful when we're thinking about how a conservation easement is being constructed to make sure that it's not inviting unwanted control from an entity that already basically has a monopoly. And so this is just one we're paying attention to. We just found out about it. But people who know me, I've had concerns about conservation easements for a long time. My biggest concern is that they tend to be permanent. And I think that's a idea for us to assume we know enough about anything to try to say we're creating a permanent policy outcome here. We need to leave our kids the flexibility to solve their own problems and not lock up their resources in ways that they can later. And so they should have sunset clauses, and we should be very careful about how these are used as tools to invite federal meddling and control.
Unlike what we're seeing in Montana, because the state is wanting that funding to purchase conservation easements, 400,000 acres. They're using a national conservation area to lock up 5.8 million acres. So it's not just.
Yeah,
It's so much bigger.
an example of like the federal strings to facilitate some money to flow that otherwise would be restricted. They definitely use the federal budget to expand federal control against the states. And so we just have to be very, very careful when we're changing policy on these fronts because, Brett, you ever had any bad experiences coming up to the gate on private land out on one of our public roads? Yeah, I mean, it's like the public land system is not a perfect system, but it is very beneficial for outdoor recreation if we manage it that way. I love private property. I own private property. I support private property. But you add in a whole bunch of private property owners, and then they have easements and restrictions and other management prescriptions on what's going on there. And that becomes one of the hardest obstacles to solve. Starts happening and proliferating as a gate gets put up. You now have to get counties involved and lawyers, and county attorneys, and sheriffs, and everybody has to come in and solve a problem. And that's okay. That's why we have these institutions, is to work through those. But we need to be very, very careful if we're going to invite more of that on a broad scale.
Private property, it's private property with federal strings attached, and that's the scary part.
And this is also happening like with the water. I mean, I'm worried that although a lot of policies have been put in place to kind of conserve water in the Colorado River, a lot of it's just been throwing money at the farmers in California. And I sympathize with those. They grow all of our lettuce in the winter and broccoli, and they do an important work. Like I would never want to undermine the agricultural industry because it's so crucially important. But if we normalize that we're just going to pay people to not utilize their water right that they have, I mean, that was a short-term solution to a very short-term acute problem. But we need to probably be thinking about the strings that come attached with that down the road. And what happens in a crisis? What are the long-term ramifications of that? I know the federal government loves to take advantage of those. I worked in DC during enough crises to know all the garbage they put in place. So do we have any other things to cover? Simone, I think oh yeah, let's do the quote. Yeah, this was freaking me out. He's the first governor of our state. This is when he said that the people of Utah, that we will get rich here and forget God and his people wax fat and get themselves out of the church. And they'll stand all these persecutions. That's why they came here. But their greatest fear is they can't stand wealth. And that's kind of one of my concerns about this. The natural asset company is just we're going to come buy this from you. And I think I don't want Wall Street coming and fulfilling this prophecy. This is our state. We are here. There's a lot of good reasons to be here. We've grown to love it in a lot of different ways, and we should be the ones running it and controlling it and building a good life here. And so let's just be careful between all of these tools, what we talked about, like a conservation easement, the conservation leases, natural asset companies, all of those are people with more money than we could possibly print showing up and say, we want to buy your little birthright of a state here, and let's protect it. Let's keep it for us. I like it enough. I want me and my kids to build a good life here. And so hopefully you'll help us do that.
I want to give chance for questions, but I just want to point out there's a couple of legislators in the room. This is District 69. Grand, San Juan, Kane, Garfield, Wayne, Emery County. There's one representative that is in the legislature over that versus 65 of them up here on the Wasatch Front. So when they start passing policy, This is just all on the menu. It's like whatever we have to do down in our counties, we'll give that away to protect Hill Air Force Base or whatever these interests on the Wasatch Front. When I'm fighting SUA, I mean, I've had this Red Rock Wilderness Bill in front of me since, for 15 years now, looking at it and just watching these things happen. So SITLA came out with their trade, and I've been fighting that since 2016, and saying that's the Red Rock Wilderness Bill. But this last one that came out with their latest proposal, swapping all of the SITLA sections out of San Juan County, essentially, San Juan County, also included a little section up here in Tooele. I said, well, why are you trading Tooele sections as part of the Bears Ears deal? Like, oh, well, I said, because it's the Red Rock Wilderness Bill. You are running the Red Rock Wilderness Bill. And then I said, I don't have to fight SUA anymore. I just have to fight SITLA. You're carrying the water for SUA. You are now the enemy. You're doing this to us. And somehow getting that communicated is such a difficult thing, as you know, in these rural counties, which again, it was the whole purpose of the Yellowcake Caucus, was to leverage the county commissioners to say, we may not have a bunch of reps down here, but we do have a bunch of county commissioners. So I want to turn it back over to Ben if there's questions.
Answer to that question. I mean, what's going to save us from the climate change? Batteries. So they have a lot of lithium, and so they want to build a lithium mine somewhere out here near Delta. And SUA is blocking the lithium mine through lawsuits because they don't. And I would be very shocked if it's not somewhere here in Juab County or that is one of these orange splotches. If there's a mineral extraction proposal, even if it's to save us from climate change, they will still see the block that if it's more than 15 years. And so it's not, even though there is a lot of mineral extraction on the table in places like this, there's mineral extraction on the mineral extraction. And there's no reason to question that, even though there's not really red rocks. Whatever, but yeah, so I think that answers the question. Other questions? Yeah. Back to the roads. We need to. I'd like to commissioners, states are acting authority. There's a lot of things doing their part because there's a few of them that are kind of slacking. Very important. We're in one of the lawsuits running right now, Blue Ribbon Coalition in Idaho, with a private landowner put up with the gate. We partner with the local club up there, and and there's times where I see that and the landowner's right. There's times I see that and the government's right, and every one of those is a case by case basis. But your county commissioners need to fight. The county roads need to stay as public right of ways. That as long as that's recognized and managed that way, that it helps the state's positions in court. It helps us maintain public access. Let's go. What's your name? Oh, hey. Yeah, good to meet you. Oh, and the monument plan? Yeah, they've defined that a landscape is an object situated upon a landscape. And so they've interpreted that to just basically be whatever we can see is the object we're protecting. And that's one of the things we're challenging in our challenge to the National Monument, the Antiquities Act of Use. We're in the 10th Circuit right now with the state of Utah. But I know what you're getting at. They're very difficult about defining that. And when you want them to define an archaeological site, they say, well, we can't tell you that because then that discloses it to the public and then people know, and then the sites go get looted or vandalized or whatever. So there's like reasons they're cagey about that. But all it's done is open the door for the Antiquities Act to be abused. Yeah.
Can I just add something to that? So we've asked them numerous times. Just to give us their specifics that they're planning, and they refuse to give that answer. Since we litigated the use of the antiquities, they can do too much. They're not going to give that list to us because so it's double speak, because how are we supposed to be planning with them if we don't know exactly what they're planning for? So we know there's more to it than just what's listed in the convention. So we're really frustrated because we can't do our job as the state planning for these issues if we don't know what they're planning for. So it's sort of
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. Like when you're in litigation, like let's say you're in like a divorce proceeding. If one of the parents runs away with the kids to Mexico, that's a problem. Like you have to, things have to stay in place until the legal issues get settled. And so that's what's been frustrating about this is that you litigate because you have serious concerns about what's happening. If you go close them, which means you obliterate them, you're permanently changing on the ground how this will operate. If we win in court, there's not going to be roads there for us to go back and enjoy our victory. And the same thing's happening, like Rez just pointed out in the grand staircase challenge, like we won't tell you what you, because you're suing us, we can't tell you what you need to be in the plan. Well, good, then let's put a pause on the planning process till the legal settlement gets settled. That's what any like reasonable. And so when I called Senator Lee about the Labyrinth Rim plan, I said, I don't know if you've decided to start supporting the Red Rock Wilderness Act, but if you don't do anything to stop this, you're basically supporting it. And he's like, well, what should we do? And I said, defund the planning because they're using the planning to do this. And so as long as they're using the planning process to undermine your authority in Congress to decide whether this is the law of the state of Utah, then that needs to stop. And so he introduced the Historic Roadways Protection Act, which does defund all the travel planning, not just Moab, but all of it, until our RS-2477 case gets settled. Because that's another one that's been going on for years. And they're closing RS-2477 roads through this process, which is running away with the kids to Mexico. You shouldn't be doing that during a legal challenge. And so John Curtis has supported that. Celeste Malloy has supported that. I've talked to Burgess Owens, Chief of Staff, this week. He's going to get on board. So if you know Blake or Senator Romney, we need them on the Historic Roadways Protection Act. So if you're in their districts, let them know. It's a very simple bill that is reasonable. I think they talked with you at Flipco about this, right? And just to make sure it was that the state would be okay with it. So this should be something that everyone in Utah supports because it helps solve that problem. Jody had a question, and then we have a bunch more.
The RS-2477 is the road right of ways on public lands, and right now, there's a movement that's coming in, shut down the road and say, you can't open that up. My bill basically says, you can't shut it down. And it's pie in the sky, likely, because it's the federal government, but the state of Utah should say, no, those are our roads, they'll stay open until you can.
Texas is chasing those pies in the sky right now.
It's pie in the sky, but it's the right thing to do. Yeah, I think kids go to Mexico and then make us fight to get it back. It's the whole thing is so wrong. And until the state steps up and at least says we're not going to play that game anymore, then we'll keep playing the game.
Hi, my name's Mick. 2.5 weeks into the job, but I'll tell you, we're setting the agenda now for the National Association of State Trust Lands meeting in August, coincidentally, in Idaho. Do you plan on attending that? Would you like to?
If that's an invitation, we would love to be.
Okay, I mean, I know they're looking for sponsors. I'm not trying to throw that out on the table, but at least we may be able to get you.
Yeah, yeah, I'm very interested to get to know all the trust land managers. We have I don't know if you're coming over to the Capitol after this. We all there's like off-road day on the hill. We have a booth over there, and you can come talk to me. I'll give you a business card, but I would be very interested.
Thank you.
Was there? So, yes, Les.
Ben, real quick, just to point out, each of the representatives in the United States Congress, they represent Utah. they're elected by their district residents, but they represent Utah. So don't feel like, oh, I'm not in Blake Morris district. You are.
Yeah, I mean, as long as we're 67% federally controlled, we're kind of like a national colony of everybody else. And so yeah, and that's why, and we've worked with a lot of folks in other states too. Once we get everyone in Utah, we have a good list of folks nationally who we think we can get to support the Historic Roadways Protection Act, but we want to get everyone in Utah first. Yeah.
What I find interesting is I don't think all federal agencies are walking in the same step here, because Industrial Revenue Service is spending millions of dollars to gather data to look for minerals. So they can close it, yeah. So we're working on that. I mean, so there's a bit of a dichotomy going on. You know, you got people trying to chase it, and they're spending federal dollars, and you got others that are spending federal dollars to shut it down. And I don't totally.
Yeah, there's a lot of cooks in a really small kitchen, and some are doing important work, trying to cook food, and Sue is a fire extinguisher, get on everybody and not letting us cook. Yeah, no, and state of Utah, to be fair, is one of the best states to work in, because we do have, even the staff within our federal agencies here, most of them are very good people that want the public out utilizing public land. They're getting directives from Washington that they will lose their jobs if they defy them. And so, and then our state agencies are great. Like, of all the states we work with, they're like, it's not even like a contest that Utah is the best. Like, our state government is always a reliable ally in making sure that the interest, and it's not like I don't have to really ever call Reg to say, hey, Reg, this, they're just doing. We just can take for granted they're going to do the right thing, and we really appreciate that. And it's needed here, but
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah.
Ben and other citizen groups are also critical to this effort as well. I can't tell you how important it is for citizen groups like this and outdoor folks to be involved, because congressional folks have public outreach offices, or people, the governor's office does. When those telephones light up about issues like the NACs, the governor's office called us it was probably December, you know, hey, what are you guys doing on NACs? Because we're getting lit up.
He was working on it, but you know, by getting lit up, and that was work that you guys were doing. You guys were making the citizens aware. It's critically important to make sure that elected officials are hearing from the citizens. So that
You guys drive policy, and we hear from you. That gives us extra motivation, and we also need your help.
Program where you can when you use roads, you use those roads for.
So we need your help as citizens to help us fight back on these things. So thanks for being involved. Thanks for your.
Yeah,
It's like
I want to add one sentence to the map. When we filed our petition to stay on the Moab decision, it got denied. And one of the women that worked for SUA was in a Facebook comment, like, making fun of, oh, your appeals get denied for the exact same reasons. So say what you want. But the reason we got denied is because they say we aren't suffering irreparable harm. We can just go use another trail. And the BLM can just reopen them up. So it's reparable. And so what we haven't done a good enough job at is a recreation community. And I think part of this is because nobody wants to politicize their recreation. You go recreate outdoors to get away from politics and church and all the things that are like a demand on your attention in life. So for me to come and say, oh, you're outdoor recreating, guess what you just signed up for? My political movement. Nobody wants to hear that. But unfortunately, there is the need for people to recognize that and become part of it. And because of that, we need to do a much better job of personalizing why these trails are important to us. And so that when they get to, and they are, people just don't know. I go talk to everybody I see in these areas when I'm out there. And I ask people, I'll go talk to them, I'll go intrude on their camp for a minute and say, hey, do you know they're going to close your campsite? And the reaction I get is visceral. People are very, very upset about this. These sites, these roads, these trails, these lands mean something. It's not just some weekend getaway. It is like deep to the core of who they are and what they value in life. And then it's just getting taken away for not really any good reason other than a political agenda. And so we have to make sure these agencies know how important these are. One of the tools we've done, if you guys come over to our booth at this thing across the Capitol, we have our Lost Trails guidebook. One of the reasons they close trails is because they say we're not using them and that they're reclaiming. And so we go out and find all the trails they're saying that about, put them in a guidebook. A lot of these trails are in your counties. And so come check it out. These are the lesser known trails so that people can go use them and get to know them. And so that we can build that record of why we care so much about these. The record exists, we just haven't documented. Yeah, we had, and did you have a question?
I was just gonna put a plug in for Blue Ribbon Coalition. I'm part of the ATV club. I'm a commissioner, but also part of the Utah Arizona ATV club. And they have a program, $5 a month. Everybody in this room should be giving $5 a month or more to their effort. You know, we spend more than that on a.
Yeah, and if you.
It's a great organization in King County. We appreciate everything they've done there.
We appreciate that. And if you are a Swiss billionaire and you want to make a bigger donation than $5 a month, so that we can be. Now that, but it is not cost prohibitive to be a member of Blue Ribbon Coalition, and every legal thing we fight, we talk about who our members are, how many we have, and we always want to go into court saying we represent as many people as possible. So we've made that easy. Then, yep,
So I'm just gonna say there's a lot of elected officials in here, and the real answer is to go back into your communities and to find people. So Mayor Tom Hershey reached out to my husband Willie and said, hey, we need to have an ATV club started in Hurricane, Utah. So we got together and it started with just a few hundred people. There's 1,400 there now. But what happened is they went and pulled out all the old people's maps and they looked at those old roads and said, well, here, we didn't have GPSs. They had to hire Bush and Gudgel to come in, but they had to pull up their signs and say, okay, this road's open again, this road's open again. And how many 2,000 miles of roads in southern Utah? It wasn't open. King County had a huge, but some of it just wasn't being addressed. You get more people. It answers people.
Yeah, that's what I love about this. I would take
Those leaders.
our little group, all these little ATV groups, I go meet with them all the time. I would take that over a Swiss billionaire any day of the week. And that's what makes us strong. We just need to act as strong as we actually are. Yeah.
We have an internal problem within Utah where we, as county councilmen from Jackson, we are trying to get former trails and things like that, but there's something that hasn't been used. We're trying to get those open. They gated us off. We're in litigation and so forth. And then all of a sudden we have a state legislative proposal that just basically just wipes us out. Just basically because we are going through some private ground where roads existed and where we're trying to open that up. They go to other private ground and even some other trails. And I tell you, and now we've got something that's basically affects everybody in the state. And we're putting some of the other trails now.
Yeah.
And I agree that as you guys described this, that same bill that's out there right now, SB 67, I think that will fit right into the card of what I'm seeing on it.
Yeah, I haven't looked at that bill yet, but let's just be fair that public land policy is super, super complicated and nobody ever gets it all right. That's why we have to have these discussions. So we appreciate you bringing that up. I'd love to learn more about that if you want to come talk to us after. Yeah, we have a question, but so we like the open discussion, we like to change, and even if Utah doesn't get things right, I have yet to find an elected official in the state that if I get in front of them and I articulate my position and come with a good reason of why I think the way I do, I haven't get them to move in my direction. We have good institutions here. We have to keep the dialogues open and use them. And so we'd love to learn more about what's going on in your county. Where was the other? Oh. Yeah, I know. I call it wilderness wandering. We have wilderness study areas, we have. Yeah. And this doesn't include any Forest Service land for the most part, I mean, a little bit here, but you have designated roadless areas, you have designated habitat for endangered species. I mean, you really start adding in all of the potential land use restrictions, and this whole map could basically be orange if we're not careful, and it's always constant fight.
I want to interrupt for just a second. We've got this room for like till 9 o'clock. You're welcome to stick around and talk. I just want to, I guess, do a little bit of housekeeping.
Yeah.
We've taken off and a few people have to go. Next week is Dr. Mehmet from BYU talking about thorium and small modular nuclear reactors. If you've heard his presentation before, it's exciting, it's fun. So, and we've tried this year to kind of keep one topic per meeting because there's a lot to talk about. So I really appreciate that. Please go over to the expo sometime this morning and tell them thanks for the breakfast and support them, support Blue Ribbon Commission Coalition. Thanks to King County commissioners here, Paiute County, got commissioners here, Wayne County. You can go back and pass this on to your Garfield County people. San Juan County, thanks Sylvia, and many others, Paiute, and who did I leave out? Cache. Yeah, in Cache County. But really feel free to hang around, talk some more. Ben can keep taking questions. If you need to leave, feel free. Anything else anybody needs to say housekeeping wise before we?
The expo?
I think it's go 10. So there's people over there right now, so you gotta go.
Yeah.
Check in.
I did, there was a carryover from last year's agenda that got thrown on with Bill Keach and John Baza. That was just kind of a residual from last year, but I do want to talk to you guys about, in 2 weeks or 3 weeks from now. So we'll get that going. Anyway, so if you need to leave, don't feel bad about leaving. If you want to stay, mix and mingle, grab burritos. We'll keep this, discussion going.
Yes, that's the conversation I had. It's like, well, we have to look at closing this road because it's in the act. I'm like, you have no legal obligation to even think about this act. Why are you managing? And they're getting that from judges, they're getting it from their bosses in Washington, and it's a problem.
Got an email from yesterday saying we'd signed an MOU 4 years ago to be a cooperating agency.